smiling for the camera. This has been a very interesting past couple of weeks since the election, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Now, if you know me, you know I don't think politics belongs behind the ball. It doesn't matter to me who you voted for. I mean, seriously, it really doesn't matter. What matters to me is what's happened since. I mean, look at all these protesters. You know, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, who has that much free time? I mean, I'm semi-retired, and I don't think I have the time to go out and do what they do.
Yeah.
You guys, how many of you saw that event that almost happened in Ybor a week or so ago? It was like 150 protesters going through Ybor City, burning the American flag and making a racket. They came around the corner to a pub, and there was 150 Marines starting a pub crawl. It could have been very interesting. They say they credit the Tampa police for getting in the middle and preventing anything from. It could have got very messy. What concerns me most is why don't we get on with things?
Amen.
I mean, no matter who you voted for, whether your team won or didn't win, it's how things are. Now let's get on with life. Rather than continuing to grumble and complain, let's hope for the best. Really, let's hope for the best. You know, in everything in life, in everything, we have a choice. We have the choice to view things either with optimism, or that is with hope, or with pessimism, or the lack of hope. I did a little Google search and found some interesting quotes about optimism versus pessimism. First one.
First one is fine. You.
There was.
Pretty fast.
We got fleeting optimism.
I know it's going to come back.
You're optimistic it's going to come back.
I'm not a pessimist. I'm optimistic that a bunch of crappy things will happen. Secondly, always borrow money from pessimists. They're not going to expect it back. I like that. Thirdly, unless life also hands you sugar and water, your lemonade's going to suck. And I like this a lot more. I'd read it, but it probably wouldn't do me any good. And it's breaking the curse of negative thinking. Pessimism or optimism? It really is a matter of choice of how we choose to view life.
Amen.
To view the circumstances of our life, to view the future. I like this quote from Winston Churchill. When he said, I'm an optimist because it does not seem to be of much use to be anything else. I like that. Truly being a pessimist or an optimist comes down to the same thing as having hope or not having hope. As Christians, we're called to be men and women of hope. There was a misprint of a weather forecast. Kind of liked it. It said there's a 5% chance of today and tomorrow. That's not terribly optimistic. The two basic attitudes then in life are basically this: one of hope and one of dread. One of trust, the other of fear. One of optimism, the other of gloom. I hope the odds are better than 5% if we have it today and tomorrow.
Amen.
Frank and Ernest cartoon. We see Frank getting out of bed, looking out the sun coming up, and he says rather dryly, well, the sun is rising in the east. So far, so good.
Yeah.
You guys may have heard this, I don't know, but W.C. Fields, a great comedian, died with money in hundreds of bank accounts all around the world, many of which never located. wherever he went, he opened up a bank account. Often used fictitious names and kept no records of his deposits. At one point, Fields told a friend in confidence that he had over 700 bank accounts and knew exactly where each one was. Unfortunately, he died without telling anyone else where those locations were or under what name they were held. Now, this is the same guy that the story is told that he was sitting behind stage one day when they were filming with him in. And he was sitting there, and a stagehand comes back, and he sees Fields with a Bible on his lap open. And he says, and Fields was not known to be a man of faith. And the fellow said to him, Mr. Fields, what are you doing? And he looked up and said, looking for loopholes. Apparently he had one account in Berlin that alone was said to have $50,000 in it. During the bombing of the city, all traces of that bank and the money were destroyed. Fields attributed this strange behavior of storing money in all these different cities to a dream that he had had repeatedly, in which he saw himself stranded in a strange city, without money, without friends. The fear which this dream produced in his heart caused him to open these strange, anonymous accounts in every city in which he played. How would you like to have that kind of fear driving your life, motivating your actions? This is the second week of Advent. As many of you know, each week of the 4 weeks prior to Christmas, the church is historically prepared for Christmas by spending time reflecting and thinking about godly attributes, I guess is a good way of putting it. 4 significant and vital parts of our faith. We're called by God to demonstrate with our lives. These four traits are love, hope, joy, and peace. Each week we're encouraged to spend the week pondering and studying, reading, talking about what the significance of that trait is to us each week. Last week we began with the hanging of greens, focused on love, the love of God expressed to us in the giving of His Son, how God's love is unqualifiable, how it's undeservable, unending, and eternal. We can't earn God's love, we don't deserve God's love, and yet He loves us, and as St. Paul wrote, nothing can separate us from that love.
Amen. Which
leads us to week number 2. Starting today, week number 2, we light the candle of hope. Unless you're brand new here at LifeSpring, you've heard us discussing in the past that Christianity has really nothing to do with heaven. It's not about getting us into heaven, it's about getting heaven into us. Our faith is a faith of change, a faith of commitment to change. Christianity is truly about getting heaven on earth through the hearts and lives of its followers. It's not about meeting God one day, it's about knowing God today. Christianity was referred to in the early days. It says in the book of Acts as the way. The church was called the way, meaning the correct way, as opposed to other ways of life that the world lives. Getting in the way in those days was considered a good thing. Thank you. People of the way committed themselves to a lifestyle of change. A lifestyle of changing old habits and old lifestyles to new godly habits, godly attributes. And those attributes of life, if you could call them that, are basically 180-degree opposite. The total reverse of how the world lives their lives. Believing in Christ brings change and invites us to embrace continued change. Now, of all the areas of change that God calls us to, I think the most significant, which is why the guys probably wrote the Advent concept many years ago, did. The 4 weeks of Advent being love, hope, joy, and peace. I think those 4 are the 4 most significant attributes that we can demonstrate. The world doesn't understand love. The world doesn't live in love. The world doesn't have hope. We live in a world where hope is an unknown quality. Joy is something they believe is circumstantial. They equate it with happiness. And true peace only resides in those who are at peace with God and learn how to be at peace with each other and with themselves. And so this week we talk about hope. Kind of funny because the world uses hope almost in a negative context. Well, I hope everything's going to work out. Almost as though I know it's not. But if by some miraculous stroke of luck, things work out, then that's a good thing. But they see hope as almost negative. Maybe we just need a lucky break and something good will happen. Well, that's not scriptural hope. Scriptural hope, biblical hope, the kind of hope that God calls us to is defined differently. It's defined as a confident expectation of good. A confident expectation of good. Do we have that kind of hope for our lives? We need to ask ourselves and look in our own hearts and say, do I have a confident expectation of good? That tomorrow has a better than 5% chance. You see, the 4 weeks of Advent are progressive. We understand the love of God, and in that understanding, we produce hope. Hope comes. It's knowing that God loves us, accepts us, and receives us exactly as we are. This is what gives us hope for tomorrow. Next week, we talk about joy. It's impossible to have joy without first having hope for the future. 4th week, we understand that having hope and joy is what gives us peace. Peace within our hearts, and most importantly, peace with others and with God. You know, there are some people who live with such a feeling of dread and doom about their lives that they dismiss even the possibility of joy. Even when life is being good to them, they just know it can't last. Somewhere, sometime, somehow, something out of this is going to happen to them that will wreck their best laid plans, that will frustrate their fondest dreams, that will crush everything they hold dear. That's one attitude towards life. And it's an attitude that many people hold. Fortunately, it's not the Christian attitude. It was not St. Paul's attitude, to be sure. St. Paul knew that we live in a difficult world. Anyone here disagree with that? Paul had experienced more than his share of sorrow and suffering. 2 Corinthians, Paul's second letter to the Corinthian church, chapter 11, always amazes me. Jake has referred to this a few times as well. Starting in verse 26, Paul writes, 5 times I received from the Jews 39 lashes. Stop right there. I think I'd be out the door. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I have spent in the deep. I have been on frequent journeys and dangers from rivers, dangers from robbers, dangers from my countrymen, dangers from the Gentiles, dangers in the city, dangers in the wilderness, dangers on the sea, dangers from false brethren. I've been in labor and hardship through many sleepless nights, hunger, thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. Apart from such external things, there's the daily pressure on me of concern for all the churches. Oh my goodness. 5 times he received 39 lashes. You know why they didn't do 40? Because of 40, traditionally a man died. That was being beat with a cat o' nine tails, with pieces of metal and stone tied into the rope. So they stopped at 39. Of course, he only went through that 5 times. Yeah, to say that Paul knew sorrow and suffering and difficulty, I think is a bit of understatement. But Paul knew that somewhere, somehow, sometime, something good was out there waiting for him. He knew that tomorrow would be a better day than today. He believed that lasting joy and peace were not only possibilities in life, but would someday be permanent realities. This is why he wrote Romans 15:13, when he said, "May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit." Does that sound like a man who has been through hell and back? No. This is the reason. The season. This is the reason of the season. That we celebrate God's hope. The mood of Advent is one of joyful anticipation. And fortunately, it does tend to infect all of society to some degree. Remember the 1970s, there was a comic strip, Doonesbury? Remember Doonesbury? There was one in the 70s that showed Megaphone Mark, who was the campus radical activist. First scene, you see him falling off to sleep, and above his head you can see his thoughts. It's Christmas Eve, as a tired, disappointed, and disillusioned student activist drops off to sleep. Next frame shows him sleeping. Frame after that shows him stirring as if startled by an unexpected noise. And the final frame, he says, "I thought I heard reindeer." So what we know to be true does infect out there a little bit during this season. How can it not, with people hearing the joy of Christmas carols constantly when they go shopping or anywhere else? The joy of the season of the year tends to intrude even upon the cynical Doonesbury comic strips. The bells, the lights, the sights and sounds of Christmas speak to us about hope. Speak to us about how God is alive. Love and peace and goodwill are still possibilities. There's far more than a 5% chance of today and tomorrow. Because of a baby born 2,000 years ago in a little town called Bethlehem, hope came into our world. Hope that's unquenchable. Hope that's eternal. Story in Genesis, Abraham, who at that point was still called Abram, complaining to God that he has no heir to take over the house someday. The writer of the book of Genesis says that God brings Abram outside and says to him, "Look at the heavens. Count the stars. If you're able to number them," he said to him, "so shall your descendants be." That's the call of God on all of us. When we have times of doubt, pessimism. Look at the heavens. Count the stars. During the Advent season, of course, we're called to look really for only one star. The Christmas star. The star that shines brighter than the rest. It's the star of Christmas, which is the world's greatest symbol of hope. May the God of hope, Paul writes, fill you with joy and peace as you trust in him. Advent is, first of all, hope for the world. H.G. Wells once wrote a story entitled The Days of the Comet. I don't know how many of you have read it. His story is a somewhat typical science fiction fantasy. A mysterious green vapor of unknown origin descends from the clouds and covers the earth. And the vapor has the immediate effect of putting everybody on earth into a deep, sound sleep for 3 days. When they awake, something amazing has happened. Their inner human nature is radically transformed. Petty quarreling comes to an end. Instead of seeking fame, power, and wealth, the people of the world seek to serve each other. Love, kindness, generosity become more important than greed or success. In short, the perfect society emerges. A society in which the dignity of every human being is honored. Well, I hate to disappoint Mr. Wells and anyone else that has this philosophy, but this is not science fiction. Prophet Isaiah looked forward to that kind of day when he wrote in chapter 11, "The day will come when the wolf will lie down with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them." Of course, Isaiah was not anticipating a green cloud. He was prophesying a shoot that would come up from the stump of Jesse. That's Isaiah's way of saying that there was a Messiah coming. who would establish a new world order, who would bring into being a kingdom in which love is more important than power, service is more important than domination. A Messiah who would not only establish a new world order, but he would do it by changing the hearts of men and women.
Amen.
John the Baptist saw himself as the herald of that Messiah. The one whose job it was to prepare the way for the Messiah. The concern of the prophets, however, was not only one of personal salvation, but also the salvation of Israel. And through Israel, then the salvation of the world. So let me ask you, what good is it if we save the individual, but leave him in a world that tramples upon his dignity and crushes his aspirations? A world that extinguishes hope. We need, you and I, to affirm that when the Messiah, the Christ, came into the world, he brought with him the seeds of a new kingdom. A kingdom that is still alive and still at work, wherever the name of Jesus is on the lips of believers. A kingdom that is alive and functioning as its followers embrace the changes that God called them to. It's a kingdom that has dispelled darkness. It has dispelled ignorance, exploitation, and human slavery. Everywhere the good news is faithfully proclaimed. No tyrant can forever suppress it. No evil can ever forever resist its fury. No wonder John spoke with such starkness of the wrath which was to come. The gates of hell itself cannot prevail against this kingdom, which came into the world through the birth of Christ. No wonder the angels sang in the heavens and wise men bowed in adoration. Philip Brooks wrote about Bethlehem. He said, the hopes and fears of all the years are met in each night. How does that happen if its followers don't live the life? How does that kingdom take over unless its followers live the changes that God calls upon each one and every one of us? Advent is hope. First of all, for the world, but Advent is also hope for us as individuals. Advent is hope for you and I, no matter the difficulties in our lives that we encounter, no matter the difficulties we have with breaking free from the things of the past. Advent does bring us hope. London during the Second World War. Hitler's warplanes are bombing the city with regularity. In order to safeguard the children, trainloads of them were evacuated to the country. Somebody once asked a young boy, where are you going? And he thought for a minute and said, I don't know, but the king knows. You and I are in the same situation. We don't know what the future holds, but the king does.
Amen.
He is the King of all kings
Amen.
and the Lord of all lords. This is the season of the year when we are reminded that this is God's will. This is the season of the year when we are reminded that he is at work in this world. He is at work in our hearts, each and every one of us. And even though we may be surrounded by darkness, even though every day we confront the difficulties of life, we know that there is a light shining in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it.
Amen.
Even the prospect of death cannot dispel the believer's sense of anticipation. Damon Runyon once wrote a charming story about a man named Doc Brackett. Doc Bennett is kind of a not a road to live on.
Yes.
Anyway. Doc Brackett was a beloved old physician whose office was open to the poor and needy. He'd get up in the middle of the coldest night, ride 20 miles to doctor a sick woman or child, or to patch up some guy that gets hurt. And everyone in town knew Doc Brackett's office. It was right over Wright's clothing store, up a narrow flight of stairs, and there's a sign at the foot of the stairs that said, Doc Brackett, office upstairs. Well, Doc Brackett never married. The day he was supposed to get married, he got a call to go out in the country and doctor a Mexican child. And his bride-to-be was so angry that she canceled the wedding. But the parents of the Mexican child were very grateful that the child recovered. So for 40 years, The lame, the halt, the blind of that town climbed up and down the steps to Doc Brackett's office. He never turned anyone away. Doc Brackett lived to be 70 years of age. One day he keeled over on a sofa in his office and died. Had one of the largest funerals ever seen in those parts. Everyone turned out. The townspeople wanted to erect a nice tombstone. But they couldn't agree on what should be engraved on the stone. The matter dragged along and nothing was ever done. Until one day, someone noticed that there was already a proper epitaph over his grave. The parents of the Mexican child that he had saved that night many years ago made a tombstone. They had no money to buy it, so they simply took the sign from the foot of the stairs of his office, stuck it over the grave, and it simply said, Dr. Brackett, office upstairs. During this season of the year, we pay homage to the Doc Bracketts of this world, and we declare that not only is this world a better place, but they reside in a better place now as well. You see, you and I, guys, are free to choose the attitude with which we confront life. We can believe that there's a 5% chance of today and tomorrow, or we can bring the good news of Christmas, that God is alive and well and at work in our world, bringing in a kingdom of love, a kingdom of peace, and a kingdom of hope, a kingdom of freedom. We can face the future with fear and foreboding, or we can trust in the God who has sustained us through the years and has promised us that he will never forget us, or never forsake us, regardless of our situation. We can choose to live in darkness, or we can choose to step out into the light of hope and triumph and eternal victory. We can live for ourselves alone, or we can make the world a better place for everybody. Doesn't the good news of Advent and Christmas change your attitude about life? Doesn't it make you anticipate that sometime, somewhere, somehow, something good is waiting there to happen? This is the kind of change that takes place every day when the Christ child is born again in your arms. Let's go ahead and receive our offering this morning.